William didn't know that Harry and Meghan had already recorded their poison.
It was presented as a conversation the palace could not control, a night of accusations, tears, and revelations watched across the world. But behind the polished questions and carefully timed pauses, Oprah Winfrey may already have sensed that Meghan and Harry's explosive interview was becoming something far more dangerous. The anticipation had been building for days. This was not being treated as another celebrity interview or a simple account of royal life. It was framed as a historic confrontation between two powerful worlds: the global influence of modern celebrity and the centuries-old authority of the British monarchy. On one side stood an institution built upon silence, loyalty, and tightly guarded tradition. On the other stood Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, prepared to speak without palace approval. And sitting between them was Oprah. Her presence changed everything. Oprah was not merely asking questions, she carried decades of public trust. Her sympathy could turn a personal account into an emotional verdict. Every pause mattered. Every expression carried weight. The moment she appeared stunned, millions of viewers understood that something extraordinary was being revealed, even before the full details were known. Meghan and Harry appeared determined to expose the suffering they believed had been concealed behind palace doors. They spoke of loneliness, unbearable pressure, strained family relationships, and the painful feeling that the institution had abandoned them when protection mattered most. Their words suggested that royal privilege had come with a hidden cost, and that beneath the titles and ceremonies existed a private world of fear, resentment, and emotional isolation. Before the interview aired, uncertainty reportedly spread through royal circles. No one knew which private conversations might be repeated, which family member might be implicated, or which ancient rule might suddenly be portrayed as an act of cruelty. The palace could prepare statements, but it could not prepare for every revelation. Oprah expected powerful answers. What she may not have expected was how quickly those answers would be investigated. Soon, timelines would be compared, protocols would be examined, previous statements would resurface. Emotional claims that had seemed unquestionable in the moment would be separated, analyzed, and challenged, word by word. That danger placed Oprah inside the conflict. The interview was no longer only Meghan and Harry's gamble. Her judgment, credibility, and reputation were now tied to everything they said. By giving their private grievances a global platform, she helped turn a family breakdown into an international spectacle. There would be no simple retreat after that night. Harry could not quietly return to his former role. Meghan could not separate herself from the allegations. The monarchy could not pretend the accusations had never been heard. Yet the greatest damage was still waiting beyond the broadcast, when contradictions began to emerge and Oprah reportedly started asking questions that had not been answered during the interview itself. But before regret could enter the picture, the interview had to deliver its first devastating blow, and one carefully phrased allegation would ignite a crisis that reached all the way to the throne. The most damaging moments did not arrive with shouting or confrontation. They came quietly through pauses, unfinished sentences, and allegations delivered with visible emotion. Each revelation appeared to tighten the pressure around Buckingham Palace, forcing the monarchy to confront claims it could neither immediately confirm nor safely dismiss. Meghan's account carried the weight of someone describing a life that had become unbearable behind closed doors. She spoke of isolation, emotional distress, and the belief that the institution surrounding her had failed to provide protection when she felt most vulnerable. The privilege seen by the public was placed beside private suffering, creating a disturbing contrast. She had entered royal life surrounded by ceremony and expectation, yet now described herself as feeling alone inside the very system that was supposed to protect her. Harry's position made the story even more painful. He presented himself as a husband caught between two loyalties that could no longer exist together. On one side was Meghan, asking him to recognize the seriousness of her pain. On the other was the monarchy, the family, duty, and structure that had shaped him since birth. Protecting one seemed to require defying the other. Then came the allegation that changed the entire interview. Meghan claimed concerns had been expressed about how dark their future child's skin might be. The statement was delivered without naming the person involved, leaving a shadow over the entire royal family. Oprah's stunned reaction immediately became part of the accusation's power. Her disbelief appeared to confirm the gravity of what viewers had just heard, even though the identity, wording, and full context of the conversation remained unknown. But uncertainty soon entered the story. Meghan appeared to suggest the discussion had taken place during her pregnancy, while Harry's later account seemed to place it earlier, before their marriage. The difference did not erase the emotional force of the claim, but it created a question that could not easily be ignored. When had the conversation happened? Was it one discussion, or several? And why did the timelines appear to shift? The palace initially said little. Its silence was interpreted in different ways: fear, careful calculation, or an effort to prevent an already dangerous crisis from becoming uncontrollable. Behind that silence, senior royals were allegedly furious that intimate conversations had been placed before millions without names, context, or any immediate right of reply. Oprah may initially have believed the emotional truth of the testimony would carry more weight than uncertain details. But the interview was no longer being judged only as a human confession. Every sentence was becoming evidence. Every pause was being examined. And the questions that had gone unasked were beginning to matter as much as the answers that had been broadcast. The palace had been wounded, but the story was far from settled, because as the emotional impact began to fade, investigators, commentators, and royal insiders started examining what Meghan and Harry had actually said. Within hours, the interview's most powerful claims were no longer standing alone. Timelines were compared, documents were examined, and previous statements resurfaced. What had seemed like a single, devastating account of royal cruelty began to fracture into disputed details, and Oprah's name was attached to every unanswered question. One of the first disputes surrounded Meghan's description of a private wedding ceremony held before the grand public event. Her words created the impression that she and Harry had already been married in secret, but questions quickly followed about whether the earlier moment had been a legal marriage or a deeply personal exchange of vows. What sounded intimate and romantic during the interview became another detail demanding clarification. Then, attention turned to Archie's title. Meghan suggested that established rules had somehow been altered to deny her son his rightful position. Royal commentators pushed back, pointing toward long-standing protocols connected to the monarch's grandchildren. The issue was no longer simply about a title. It became a battle over intention. Had the palace deliberately excluded Archie, or had a complicated royal system been presented as personal punishment? Her claim that she had received little preparation for royal life drew similar scrutiny. Reports emerged suggesting that aides and experienced members of the royal household had offered guidance, briefings, and assistance. Meghan's account spoke of confusion and abandonment. Other voices described support that had allegedly been available but may not have felt useful, sufficient, or trustworthy. The truth appeared to sit somewhere inside a widening gap between what was offered and what was experienced. Questions also formed around Meghan's statement that access to her passport and personal documents had been restricted. Critics compared that claim with records of international travel. To some, the trips appeared to contradict her description. To others, traveling with palace approval did not necessarily mean she possessed complete personal control. But the most serious inconsistency remained the alleged conversation about the skin tone of Harry and Meghan's child. Meghan's account seemed connected to her pregnancy, while Harry appeared to place the discussion much earlier. Timing mattered. Context mattered. Yet Oprah had not stopped the interview long enough to resolve either one. Critics began accusing her of allowing emotional power to replace necessary follow-up questions. Challenging Meghan publicly might have appeared cold or hostile, especially during disclosures of intense personal suffering. But failing to test disputed details placed Oprah's credibility at risk. Behind the scenes, her team was allegedly forced to reconsider what might have been missed, reviewing preparation notes, background discussions, and unused material. Serious accusations had reached millions, but the accused remained unnamed and unable to offer a direct response. Oprah was trapped between protecting the guests who had trusted her and confronting the worldwide consequences of what she had broadcast. The interview had promised clarity. Instead, it had created a maze of competing memories, uncertain timelines, and dangerous suspicions. Yet the deepest concern was not simply that individual details were being challenged, it was the possibility that Oprah had been drawn into a carefully controlled narrative whose real purpose had never been fully explained to her. Oprah had entered the interview believing she would guide the conversation. Instead, the conversation began guiding her. As the Sussexes' wider media strategy unfolded, she allegedly recognized a disturbing possibility. The interview had not been an isolated confession, but the opening move in a much larger campaign. At first, the broadcast appeared to be a single moment of release. Meghan and Harry had stepped beyond palace control, spoken about their pain, and offered their version of why royal life had become impossible. But as the months passed, the same grievances returned through documentaries, podcasts, memoirs, television appearances, and carefully timed public statements. What had been introduced as one deeply personal conversation began to resemble the foundation of an entire post-royal identity. That shift may have forced Oprah to question her own role. Had she simply provided a safe place for two wounded people to speak, or had her reputation been used to give their wider campaign instant authority? The difference was enormous. Listening with compassion was one thing. Becoming an unintentional participant in a family war was something else entirely. The most serious allegation remained unresolved. No name had been given. No complete conversation had been presented. No accused person had been allowed to answer directly. Suspicion spread across several senior royals, while verification remained almost impossible. Oprah's expression of shock was replayed again and again, treated by many as confirmation, even though it had been a human reaction, not an independent investigation. Meanwhile, Buckingham Palace answered with just a few controlled words. Recollections may vary. The phrase did not shout. It did not accuse. Yet it quietly challenged the entire interview by suggesting that the story was more complicated than the version millions had heard. The palace then stepped back. Meghan and Harry continued speaking. That contrast slowly changed the public mood. The monarchy's silence began to look less like panic and more like discipline, while each new Sussex disclosure raised another question about who was truly extending the conflict. Oprah reportedly began creating distance without openly condemning either guest. She avoided becoming the face of further accusations and appeared increasingly unwilling to defend every disputed claim. Privately, frustration may have grown. Her reaction had become evidence. Her platform had become a weapon. Her name remained attached to claims she had never fully tested. And somewhere behind the careful public silence, Oprah was approaching the admission she could no longer avoid. She had offered trust, but trust had carried consequences. Now she was preparing for a private conversation in which the cost of that decision would finally be spoken aloud. The realization had arrived, but the confession had not, and when Oprah finally spoke behind closed doors, her words revealed that her regret went far deeper than one missed follow-up question. For years, Oprah remained careful. She did not condemn Meghan, defend the palace, or publicly disown the interview. But according to those who witnessed the private reckoning, her restraint concealed a devastating admission. She believed the interview had crossed a line, and she regretted allowing it to happen. In this dramatized account, the admission was not an accusation that Meghan and Harry had invented their suffering. Oprah understood that pain could be real even when memories differed and details remained uncertain. Her regret came from something more complicated. She had created a space where emotion carried enormous power, but verification had struggled to keep pace. The interview had moved through allegations involving race, mental distress, family betrayal, and institutional cruelty. Each subject was explosive on its own. Together, they formed a verdict powerful enough to damage reputations across the royal family. Yet some of the most serious claims arrived without names, documents, or enough context for the people under suspicion to respond. That was the line Oprah allegedly believed should never have been crossed. She reportedly questioned why she had not stopped the conversation when timelines appeared uncertain. Why had she not pressed Harry and Meghan to explain the differences in their accounts? Why had emotional intensity been allowed to settle questions that remained unresolved? The interview had demanded compassion, but perhaps it had also demanded sharper scrutiny. Her own reactions became part of the problem. A look of shock, offered in the heat of the moment, was replayed as though it were independent confirmation. Oprah had reacted to what she heard. She had not investigated it. Yet millions saw her expression and treated it as proof that the darkest interpretation must be true. The regret was deeply personal, but it was professional too. Oprah had spent decades building trust. Now she feared that her judgment had become inseparable from allegations that continued to be challenged. She did not necessarily believe Meghan had lied. Instead, she reportedly came to see the interview as a story shaped by pain, resentment, selective memory, and information deliberately left incomplete. Then came the human cost. Harry's distance from his father and brother widened. Private wounds became public property. Every later revelation pushed reconciliation further away. Oprah allegedly began to suspect that the interview had not been the final release Meghan and Harry presented it as, but the beginning of a continuing campaign of documentaries, podcasts, memoirs, and disclosures. That realization reportedly led her to refuse an immediate follow-up. Another interview would not bring clarity. It could deepen the war and make her appear less like an interviewer than an active ally against the monarchy. When whispers of her private regret reached royal circles, there was no celebration. The original accusations had already traveled too far. Reputations had been altered, relationships damaged, and suspicions planted that no later admission could completely remove. But the most dangerous reaction was still to come. To Meghan, Oprah's regret would not look like careful reflection. It would look like abandonment by the woman whose trust had once made her story impossible to ignore. Oprah's confession answered one question, but created another far more explosive one. What would Meghan do when she learned that the woman who gave her story global power now wished she had never aired it? Meghan had trusted Oprah to give her story legitimacy, protection, and an audience larger than anything the palace could command. To discover that Oprah now regretted the interview would feel like more than criticism, it would feel like abandonment, forcing Harry into another painful choice between loyalty and truth. In this dramatized account, Meghan's anger was immediate. She did not see Oprah's regret as careful reflection. She saw it as self-protection. To Meghan, the interview had been the moment she finally escaped the limits of royal protocol and spoke without palace advisors shaping every sentence. For years, she believed others had controlled the story around her. Oprah had offered something the monarchy never had, a platform where her pain, could not be edited into silence. Now that same platform appeared to be pulling away. Meghan allegedly viewed Oprah's change in position as surrender to hostile headlines, public criticism, and the quiet pressure of an establishment determined to protect itself. The interview had once been praised as brave. If Oprah now called it a mistake, Meghan feared the entire account of their royal experience could be recast as manipulation. Harry's reaction was far more divided. He had repeatedly defended the broadcast as necessary. He believed Meghan deserved to be heard, and he had convinced himself that exposing the family's private failures was the only way to break free. But freedom had come with a brutal cost. His relationship with King Charles had weakened. Trust with Prince William had almost vanished. Conversations that might once have remained private were now surrounded by suspicion. Behind closed doors, a harder question began forming between Harry and Meghan. Had every allegation been given enough context? For Meghan, even asking that question risked undermining everything they had built after leaving royal life. The interview was not merely a television appearance. It had become the emotional foundation of their new identity, the proof that their departure had been survival rather than rejection. To question it now would be to weaken their entire story. For Harry, refusing to question anything carried a different danger. It could make reconciliation impossible. Meghan reportedly wanted Oprah to defend the interview publicly and reject the growing criticism. But Oprah would not step back into the conflict. She had no desire to become the permanent referee in a royal family war that showed no sign of ending. That distance was noticed elsewhere. Celebrity allies allegedly became more cautious, worried that private conversations, personal advice, or moments of disagreement could one day enter another interview, documentary, or memoir. The circle around the Sussexes began to feel smaller. Harry was trapped. Admitting mistakes could look like betrayal of his wife. Refusing reflection could cost him his father, his brother, and whatever remained of his place within the family. And without Oprah's unquestioned support, Meghan and Harry no longer possessed the same cultural protection that had surrounded them when the interview first aired. While Meghan and Harry struggled with the betrayal they believed had taken place, the palace saw something very different, an opportunity to let silence accomplish what years of public denials never could. Buckingham Palace did not need to celebrate Oprah's regret. It did not need statements, interviews, or accusations. The institution understood the power of silence. By saying almost nothing, the royals allowed one private admission to cast doubt over the interview that had once threatened the monarchy's survival. In this dramatized account, senior palace advisors quickly understood that attacking Oprah would be a mistake. A royal denial could be dismissed as self-defense. Oprah's own doubts were different. They carried the weight of someone who had once given Meghan and Harry their most powerful platform. If she was now questioning the interview, the palace did not need to force the issue. It only needed to wait. That patience reflected an old royal instinct. The monarchy had survived scandals before by refusing to answer every accusation in the heat of the moment. Silence could look weak at first, even frightened, but over time it could become discipline. The palace trusted that changing public opinion, disputed timelines, and the Sussexes' continuing disclosures would gradually reshape the story without a direct confrontation. Prince William reportedly carried some of the deepest wounds. The allegation involving racism struck at the honor of the institution he would one day lead, while Harry's description of their relationship turned private pain into a public rupture. He could defend the monarchy, or he could defend himself, but either response risked feeding the spectacle. King Charles faced a different torment. Family conversations had been transformed into global entertainment, yet his position demanded restraint. A father might have wanted to answer his son. A king could not speak so freely. That conflict left him trapped between personal grief and public duty. Queen Camilla and Princess Anne allegedly viewed Oprah's regret as proof that the Sussexes' accusations had been accepted too quickly. Catherine, Princess of Wales, carried her own burden after Meghan's account of their disagreement became one of the interview's most discussed moments. Still, she remained silent, allowing time rather than anger to shape public judgment. The palace knew that using Oprah's regret too aggressively could appear cruel and vindictive. It might even restore sympathy for Meghan and Harry. So advisors reportedly chose a quieter path. No victory speeches, no demand for apology, no public attempt to humiliate the Sussexes. Instead, the message surrounding possible reconciliation became colder and more controlled. Healing could not begin through another documentary, memoir, or televised confession. It would require private accountability. Oprah's regret did not erase what had been said. It did not restore damaged reputations or remove the questions surrounding the royal family, but it changed how future audiences might hear the interview. What once sounded final now appeared incomplete. And for Meghan and Harry, the consequence was brutal. Their most powerful defense risked becoming evidence against their judgment, leaving them trapped inside the very story that was supposed to set them free. The palace may have survived the explosion, but survival did not mean healing, and as the dust settled, every person involved was left confronting what the interview had permanently taken from them. The cameras were switched off years ago, but the interview never truly ended. Its accusations still follow Meghan, its consequences still divide Harry from his family, and its unanswered questions still shadow Oprah. What was meant to reveal the truth instead created several competing versions of it. The interview became a permanent turning point. It changed how the public viewed Meghan and Harry, how the monarchy responded to criticism, and how private royal pain could be transformed into global entertainment. Before that night, their departure from royal life was still open to interpretation. After it, the conflict had names, accusations, and emotional wounds that could never be quietly returned behind palace doors. For Harry, the tragedy was especially cruel. He had wanted to protect Meghan from the pressure and hostility he believed had consumed Princess Diana. Yet in trying to escape that cycle, he helped create another worldwide storm built around suffering, betrayal, and the royal family's deepest fractures. The man who feared history repeating itself became trapped inside a new version of it. Meghan gained the freedom to tell her story in her own words. But that freedom came with chains of another kind. Every disputed timeline, unanswered question, and challenged detail remained attached to her public identity. The interview gave her power, but it also ensured that her account would be examined forever. Oprah's legacy became equally complicated. She had secured one of the most significant royal conversations of modern times, but the success of the broadcast could not be separated from its consequences. Her alleged regret did not prove which claims were true or false. It revealed something more troubling. Even she may have believed the conversation lacked the scrutiny demanded by the damage it caused. The monarchy emerged wounded, but intact. Its refusal to answer every allegation gradually became a source of strength, though the silence concealed private suffering. King Charles lost trust with his son. Catherine carried accusations she could not freely challenge. And William, once united with Harry through grief, now stood separated from him by loyalty, suspicion, and public betrayal. Reconciliation remained possible in theory, but almost impossible in practice. One side continued to defend the interview as an act of survival. The other remembered it as the moment family pain was handed to the world. That was the true mistake. It was not necessarily listening to Meghan. It was allowing one deeply personal account to become a global verdict before every side had been understood. The interview promised liberation, justice, and clarity. Instead, it left Meghan more contested, Harry more isolated, Oprah more doubtful, and the monarchy more guarded than before. Perhaps the darkest secret was not what had been revealed, but how quickly millions believed one emotional evening could contain the entire truth. And perhaps that is why Oprah's regret matters so deeply, because once a private wound becomes public history, even the person who opened the door can never fully close it again.